on the roof of the century-old farmhouse outside Guelph, pulling apart a rotted section of soffit with my bare hands, when a silver SUV turned off the county road and came up the gravel lane like it had the wrong address, but decided to commit anyway. It was the kind of car that people in Toronto lease to feel safe on winter highways. Out here, it looked misplaced. I watched it from up top, one knee on the shingles, caulk gun tucked under my arm, while it pulled to a stop beside my truck. The woman who stepped out was maybe early 40s, dark coat, good boots for someone not expecting mud. She stood in the driveway and looked at the farmhouse the way people look at something they inherited and have not figured out what to do with yet. One of my guys, Dale, came around from the back of the house and started to wave her toward him. She did not go toward Dale. She looked up. "Are you the one they Callum?" she called. I set the caulk gun down on the roof beside me. "Depends on who's asking. My name is Isabel Vance." That name landed differently than most. You live in Wellington County long enough, you hear Vance the same way you hear the name of a river or a road. It just becomes part of the geography. Vance Agricultural Holdings, Vance Feed and Supply. The old Vance grain elevator that sat at the edge of Fergus and got photographed by every passing tourist who thought it looked romantic. If you bought corn seed or rented farmland within 40 kilometers of here, at some point you dealt with the Vances. I climbed down 2 rungs of the ladder and stopped. "What can I do for you, Isabel?" She looked past me at the farmhouse, then back. "I need a fiancé by Friday." Dale made a sound behind her that could have been a cough or could have been something else. I kept my face still. "I think you have the wrong farmhouse," I said. "I have the right farmhouse. I looked you up. Callum Reid, Greed Heritage Restorations. You own the property on the 4th line. You turned down a purchase offer last spring." I came down the rest of the ladder and pulled off my work gloves. That offer was insulting. It was $1.2 million. For land my grandfather farmed, yeah, insulting. Something crossed her face. Not offense, something more like recognition. She opened her bag and pulled out a folder. "My father's succession agreement has a clause. If I'm not engaged to be married before the annual company review on Friday, operational control of Vance Holdings passes temporarily to my brother Marcus. He's already told 3 suppliers he plans to restructure, which in Marcus's language means sell the grain elevator, close the Fergus office, and consolidate everything into a holding company he runs out of Mississauga." I looked at Dale. He held up both hands and walked away. "So go find someone to be your fiancé," I said. "I have. You?" I pulled a rag from my back pocket and wiped my hands. "Lady, I fix old buildings. I don't do whatever this is." "You refused a buyout that would have made most people your age retire early. You live where your family lived. You work with your hands. You don't owe anybody anything in this county." She looked at me steadily. "Marcus can't buy you. He already tried through a numbered company. You didn't even return the call." I stopped wiping my hands. That was him. Yes. I thought about the voicemail. A smooth voice, no company name, just a number and a price that was too round and too high. The kind of offer that tells you someone wants what you have more than they want you to know why. "Why me?" I asked. "Because everyone else Marcus would try to discredit, he can. Old friends who owe favors, people with money he can threaten, lawyers who cross-reference with his lawyers." She closed the folder. "You're none of those things. I'm a guy who patches roofs." "You're a guy who patches roofs and told Marcus Vance's shell company to go to hell without knowing it was Marcus Vance." She paused. "That's rarer than you'd think." I looked at the farmhouse behind me. The soffit still needed 20 more feet of work before the rain came in Wednesday. The living room window on the east side had a crack in the sill that was going to let cold air in by November if I didn't get to it. I had 2 other jobs lined up after this one, and a guy starting Monday, whose first day I was already trying not to mess up. "What do I get?" I asked. "A fair contract, legal protection, no claim on your business, no claim on your property, no bleed into your finances. You walk away clean." "That's not what I asked." She looked at me differently then. "What did you ask?" "I asked what I get, not what stays mine. What do I actually get out of standing next to you in a room full of people who are going to spend the whole time deciding if I'm real?" She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "The grain elevator." I looked at her. "What about it?" "Marcus wants to sell it to a developer, condos. The heritage designation application has been stalled at the municipal level for 8 months because no one with standing has pushed it forward. If I keep operational control, I will personally fund the restoration and see the designation through. She held my gaze. You know what that building is worth? I did know. Every restorationist in Ontario knew that elevator. Red brick, timber frame construction, late 1800s, sitting on the edge of a heritage district that nobody had bothered to protect. It was the kind of building that only got one chance. I've got one condition, I said. I expected one. You come to my shop first. You meet Dale, you meet my crew, you see what you're dragging into your story. And then, if you still want to do this, we talk about Friday. She looked down at her boots, then at the mud beside the gravel. When? Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Fine. Not fine, I said. 8 o'clock means 8 o'clock. Not 8:15 because you hit traffic on the 401. 8. She didn't flinch. 8 o'clock. I put my gloves back on and turned toward the ladder. Behind me she said, Callum. I looked over my shoulder. Bring identification. We may need to move fast depending on how Friday's timeline shifts. I looked at the gray October sky and said nothing. 20 minutes ago, I was worried about a rotted soffit and Wednesday rain. Now, Isabel Vance needed a fiancé, and I had apparently agreed to at least consider being one. Dale found me at the top of the ladder 10 minutes later. What was that? A complication, I said. She's a Vance. I'm aware. Her brother Marcus tried to buy the Hendersons out last year. Pushed them pretty hard. I know. I kept working. Go finish the back eve. Dale went, but I caught him on his phone as he walked around the corner, and I was pretty sure he wasn't calling his wife. She showed up at 7:58. I'll give her that. My shop sat on my property, a low-built converted dairy barn. I'd spent 3 years turning into a working restoration space. It wasn't pretty from the outside. Salvage doors leaning against the wall, a stack of old porch columns under a tarp, window sashes sorted by era on a rack I'd built from fence posts. Inside it smelled like sawdust, linseed oil, and the coffee that had been burning since 6. Dale saw her pull in and came to stand beside me without being asked. She stepped out of the SUV in different boots today. Still good, but flat, work appropriate. I noticed that. I brought her in through the main door. The planer was running in the back. 2 of the guys, Curtis and Mark, looked up once and went back to what they were doing. A radio played low somewhere near the finishing bench. This is what gets pulled into your mess, I said. Curtis has been with me 4 years. Mark just bought a house in Elora. Dale's got twin boys starting hockey this winter. I looked at her. Whatever comes from Marcus, it doesn't stay just with me. Isabel looked around the shop without the expression rich people sometimes get, the one that's trying to look impressed without admitting they weren't expecting much. She just looked. Seriously, like she was taking inventory of something that mattered. I understand, she said. You're starting to, I said. Dale stepped forward. You the Vance woman? Isabel, she said. He looked at her the way Dale looks at everyone the first time. Flat, patient, reading. Marcus give you trouble too? She met his eyes. Yes. He nodded once, like that settled something, and went back to the window sash he'd been cleaning. It was the most Dale had ever said to a client in under 30 seconds, and Isabel seemed to understand it meant something without needing me to explain it. At 10 o'clock, I was in a lawyer's office on Woolwich Street in Guelph with a woman named Patricia Osei, who spoke quickly and did not appear to believe in wasted sentences. Isabel had arranged her. Isabel had also arranged for Patricia to have had no prior dealings with any Vance entity, which Patricia confirmed before she even sat down. The agreement was 11 pages. My business stayed mine. My property stayed mine. My equipment, my contracts, my reputation. If this dissolved badly, there was a clause that sealed my name from any litigation Vance Holdings might face in the next 18 months. I read every page. Patricia sat across from me and waited, which told me she was good at her job. You understand this is unusual, Patricia said. Getting more usual by the hour, I said. She glanced at my hands. Still had caulk under the left thumbnail from yesterday. She looked back at the contract. Sign where the tabs are. Isabel was in the hall. She did not come in once. By Thursday afternoon, we were standing in a municipal office in Center Wellington with a notary who'd clearly had a longer day than either of us. No family, no flowers, no one from Isabel's world or mine watching to make sure this was what it looked like. The notary read through the Declaration of Common Law Partnership Registration, which under Ontario law and the terms of the succession agreement constituted legal recognition for the purposes of the clause. It wasn't a wedding. It was a form, but when I signed my name, it felt like something more than paper. Isabel signed beneath me. Her handwriting was sharp and quick, like she'd learned to make decisions fast and sign before she could change her mind. Outside on the sidewalk, she pulled her coat tighter against the October wind coming off the Speed River. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," I said. "Your brother knows by now." Her phone confirmed it 40 seconds later. Friday's review was held in a boardroom at a law firm on Stone Road. Long table, high-backed chairs, a water pitcher nobody touched, and Marcus Vance at the far end, looking like a man who had already rehearsed his victory speech and was annoyed at the delay. He was younger than I expected, maybe 38, well put together. The kind of guy who would have been friendly at a barbecue right up until he decided you had something he wanted. He looked at me the way some people look at a stain they've just noticed on a good tablecloth. "Isabel," he said, "this is creative even for you." She set the registration certificate on the table. "The clause is satisfied." Marcus looked at me. "And you are?" "Callum Reid, Reid Heritage Restorations." He let a pause sit there. "What exactly does Heritage Restoration pay these days?" "Enough," I said. "What does selling your family's grain elevator to a condo developer pay?" The room shifted a degree. An older board member to my left cleared his throat. Marcus smiled, but it did not reach anything above his cheekbones. "A romantic gesture," he said, "but the board will want to confirm the legitimacy of this arrangement." Isabel's lawyer, a composed man named Gerald, who looked like he'd been in boardrooms longer than Marcus had been alive, laid the registration paperwork, the notarization, the timeline, and 3 corroborating documents in a neat row on the table. The chair of the board, a woman named Frances, who looked like she had seen every version of this particular family argument before, read through everything without expression. Marcus watched Isabel the whole time. "You've embarrassed the company." Isabel's voice was level. "I've kept you from selling it before Christmas." That one held the room for a moment. Frances folded her hands. "The succession clause has been satisfied. Operational review proceeds with Isabel Vance as controlling authority." Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket. He looked at me one more time. "I hope she was worth the trouble." "I hope the elevator was worth yours," I said. Isabel's hand found my sleeve under the table for just a second. I stopped there. Marcus left without another word. For about 20 minutes, I thought the hard part was done. Then Gerald's phone lit up, then Isabel's, then Frances's assistant came through the side door with an expression that people only wear when the news is bad in public. Isabel looked at her screen. She turned it toward me slowly. A regional news site. Her name in the headline, mine beside it. Vance holding succession in question as daughter files emergency partnership to block brother. And below it, sourced anonymously, the words, "Sources close to the family call the arrangement a legal fiction designed to circumvent the estate's intentions." "Marcus," she said. Outside the boardroom windows, I could see someone with a camera phone standing near the building entrance. Isabel's phone rang, didn't stop. She stood very still, not the kind of still that means calm. The kind that means she was holding 6 problems at once and choosing which one to drop first. I picked up her folder from the table and handed it to her. "You needed a fiancé by Friday," I said. She looked at me. "You've got one," I said. "Pack what you need. My property's got the 4th line address. Marcus knows the Woolwich Street office. He does not know my driveway." She arrived at 9 that night with 2 bags, a laptop case, a set of files in a box she'd clearly packed in a hurry, and the expression of someone who had been performing competence all day in a room full of people waiting for her to crack. My farmhouse wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, a front room with a wood stove that I'd rebuilt the flashing on last January, a kitchen table that had belonged to my grandfather and still had a gouge in the corner from the time he dropped a hay hook on it in 1987. Isabel stepped inside and stood in the entrance with her bags and looked around. "It's very," she started. "Old," I said. I was going to say honest. I showed her the spare room. Single bed, good mattress, a window that looked west over the field. I told her the propane baseboard ran from a wall switch, the bathroom was shared, and the coffee maker was a 12-cup drip from 2019. That worked fine if you didn't let it sit past noon. You really know how to welcome a business partner, she said. I'm improvising. She looked at me for a second. Something relaxed slightly around her eyes. The next 2 weeks were not what anyone would write about in a romantic film. Isabel had lawyers calling from 6 in the morning. Marcus had apparently contacted 2 of the company's major suppliers to suggest the succession clause challenge was still viable pending a review. Gerald pushed back. Isabel pushed back harder. I answered the shop phone 3 times in 1 week to find someone asking questions that weren't about windows or doors, and Dale started saying no comment as his standard greeting, which the actual clients found confusing. At night, Isabel sat at my grandfather's kitchen table with her files spread in neat rows, while I ate leftover chili from the pot I'd made Sunday. We didn't talk much at first. She worked. I worked across from her on a quote for a barn restoration in Rockwood. The wood stove made the room warmer than it needed to be, and neither of us mentioned it. She slept in the spare room. I slept in my own bed, and badly. But things shifted. Quietly. The way frost comes into old windows, you don't see it moving, and then one morning it's just there. She figured out that the coffee maker needed the lid pushed down hard on the left side or it ran slow and lukewarm. I learned she drank it black until about 9 at night, and then added so much sugar you could have stood a spoon up in it, which she did while pretending to be reviewing documents. She started leaving her good boots by the back door in a pair, neatly, like the day had finally given up on her. I stopped moving them. One evening I came in from the shop and found her standing on the bed in the spare room, trying to reach the top of the window frame with a towel. "What are you doing?" I asked. "There's a draft." "Where?" "The top right corner. It's been here since Tuesday." "Why didn't you say something?" She looked at me from up on the mattress. "I thought I could manage it." "With a towel?" "I've managed with less." I found a piece of foam weather strip in a shop the next morning, fixed the corner in under 10 minutes. Isabel stood in the doorway of the spare room afterward and opened and closed the window twice, testing it. She didn't say thank you in words. She just nodded once, like I had passed something. The following Monday, she brought coffee to the shop for everyone. She'd asked Dale the week before which orders people took, and she'd written the names on the cups in her sharp, quick handwriting. Curtis looked at his cup, looked at the writing, then looked at me. "She knows how I take it," he said. "She pays attention," I said. Dale watched her talk to Mark about a set of Victorian window profiles he was restoring from a farmhouse in Puslinch. He leaned toward me after a minute. "She's not what I thought she was." "What did you think?" "Boardroom trouble with better shoes." "She is boardroom trouble," I said. "She just also listens." He considered that. "Worse kind," he said, and walked back to his workbench. A few days later, I took her through the grain elevator in Fergus. It was a November afternoon, gray light coming off the Grand River, and the building sat where it always had, solid and neglected and refusing to look defeated. The brick exterior was in better shape than most people assumed. What looked like deterioration from the street was mostly weathering and a century of prairie grime that nobody had bothered to clean. Inside, the timber frame was still sound in the main section. The upper floors needed structural assessment, but the bones were there. I walked her wall to wall. The brick veneer is restorable. That's not the problem. The problem is the interior loading floor on the second level, and 3 of the main support columns that have moved. Not failed. Moved. I put my hand against the south column. Anyone who tells you to gut this building and rebuild is either scared of the real work or billing you for the fear. Isabel stood in the middle of the main floor with her head tilted back, looking up at the timber roof structure. "My grandfather used to let me come here in the summer," she said. "When I was little, he'd walk me through in the morning before anyone else arrived and explain what everything was for." I waited. "He wasn't a patient man generally," she said, "but in here he was different. Slower. Like the building made him slow down." "Old buildings do that," I said, "if you let them." She looked at me then. Something had changed in her face, or maybe I was just seeing it for the first time. "Marcus has never been inside this building," she said. "Not once. He knows the asset value. He doesn't know the smell of the wood." After that day, she was different with me. Or, I was different with her. hard to separate from the inside. She started reviewing my client emails at the kitchen table at night and making quiet suggestions that consistently made me sound like a better organized person than I actually was. One night she handed my laptop back and said, "You come across as irritated here." I am irritated. He's 3 weeks past the deposit deadline. Yes, but he's also a potential referral to 6 other clients in that neighborhood. Sound patient. I read what she changed. You made me sound professional. That's the goal. I was going for honest. You can be both. She looked at me over the top of the screen. Occasionally. Marcus filed a formal challenge with the estate trustees in late November. The claim was straightforward. The arrangement was manufactured. The timeline was convenient, and the registration didn't reflect a genuine relationship. Isabel arrived at the meeting with Gerald and 2 boxes of documentation. I arrived from a site visit in Cambridge, work jacket still on, my father's old pocket knife clipped to my jeans because I'd grabbed the wrong pair in the morning. Marcus saw me and his expression shifted slightly, like he'd been expecting someone easier to read. The questions were careful. Where did we live? How long had we known each other? What was the nature of the arrangement prior to registration? Did we intend to remain together beyond the clause expiration? Before Isabel could speak, I leaned forward. If you're asking whether this is real, I said, I can tell you that Isabel reorganized my filing system without asking, and I didn't say anything because she was right about all of it. I can also tell you she knows my crew by name and they've started asking me where she is when she's not at the shop. I looked at Marcus. I don't know what kind of real you're looking for, but that's the kind I've got. Half the room was quiet. Francis, who was sitting in again as chair, looked at the table for a moment. I saw one corner of Gerald's mouth do something it usually didn't do. Isabel looked at her hands. She didn't show a smile, but something softened. Marcus's challenge was declined pending further evidence he didn't have. Afterward, Isabel and I stood in the stairwell of the building with Gerald already 2 floors down, footsteps echoing away. You didn't have to say all that, she said quietly. I said what was true. She turned toward me, no folder in her hands, no coat button to the collar like armor, just Isabel in a gray sweater and a look I hadn't seen before. Callum, she said. She stepped close and put her hand against my chest, just for a second, the same way you might put your hand against old wood to feel if it's sound. And then she kissed me. Quietly. Briefly. Like something that had been deciding for weeks and had finally made up its mind. It wasn't for Marcus. It wasn't for the room we just left. It belonged to the stairwell, and to us, and to nobody else. When she stepped back, she looked like she had surprised herself. I probably looked the same. We should probably leave before Gerald comes back up to check on us, I said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Her hand was still at my collarbone. She lowered it slowly. We drove back in my truck instead of her car. Her shoulder was close to mine and every intersection on Stone Road felt longer than usual. When we pulled into the 4th line driveway and she didn't reach for her bag right away, I cut the engine and sat there with her for a minute while the heat in the cab faded. Inside, she set her files on the kitchen table and stood with her back to me. I'm not in a hurry, I said. She turned around. I've had too many things decided for me lately. I don't want this to be one of them. It won't be. I want to mean it when it's done moving slowly. Then we go slow, I said. I've been patient with buildings that took longer than that. She looked at me, and something in her face opened like a window that's been stuck for 3 seasons, and someone finally got the angle right. She stayed in the spare room for another month. I still made coffee that was adequate at best. She still corrected my emails and pretended it was for the business. But now when she moved through the kitchen, she sometimes stopped near me without a reason. And when I came in late from the shop, her light was still on, and she'd look up with the expression people have when they've been waiting, but didn't want to admit it. Some nights we sat on the front porch after dinner, watching the field go dark, talking about the grain elevator, about the Rockwood project, about nothing that Marcus could use or Gerald could file. The cold came in off the 4th line, and neither of us went inside first. Marcus ran out of moves by December. The trustees found no basis for the challenge. The heritage designation application for the Fergus elevator was formally filed in January with Isabel's signature and the company's support. The processing timeline was 12 to 18 months, which meant I had work coming that I had not planned for, and I did not mind. One Thursday in late January, I came back from a materials run in Guelph and found Isabel at the kitchen table. No laptop, no files spread in the usual rows, just one folder, closed, sitting in front of the chair across from mine. She'd changed out of work clothes into the old sweater she'd apparently adopted from my spare closet at some point, the one that said Wellington County Agricultural Fair 2018 across the front in cracked letters. Her hair was loose. She had the look of someone who had already made a decision and was giving me the chance to argue with it. "What's that?" I asked. She pushed it toward me. "Dissolution of partnership agreement." The kitchen was quiet except for the stove ticking. I sat down across from her. She kept her hands flat on the table and kept going before I could open the folder. "The clause has expired. The challenge failed. The elevator application is filed. You did everything you agreed to do, and more than I had any right to expect from someone I met on a roof in October." She paused. "I don't want you staying because you started something and your nature won't let you leave it unfinished." I looked at her. "You rehearsed that?" "Several times." "How many?" "More than I'm going to tell you." I looked at the folder. Plain cover. Clean tabs inside. A legal path out of something that had long since stopped being legal in any way that mattered. "Isabel," I said. She looked at me. "I came in from the shop last Tuesday at 8:30 at night, and there was a plate in the oven with a paper towel over it because you'd made extra and didn't want to say so." I opened the folder. "I don't want out." I closed it and pushed it back across the table. "I don't want my kitchen table back to myself. I don't want to fix windows for someone other than us. I don't want to watch the designation go through without you standing in that building when it does. I don't want to take this off," I said, and I put my hand flat on the table so she could see the signet ring I'd moved to my right hand the week we registered, the one that had been my father's, the one I told myself I kept wearing for appearances. Her eyes went bright. She looked at the ring, then at me. "I was trying to be fair," she said. "You were being careful," I said. "That's different." She pushed the folder to the edge of the table like it had overstayed its welcome. "I don't want out either," she said. That was the moment the arrangement ended. Not in a law office, not in front of a board, at a scratched kitchen table that belonged to my grandfather, with a wood stove ticking down the hall, and Isabel in a stolen sweater telling me the truth. After that, life didn't become simple. It became ours. The green elevator designation came through 11 months later, on a Friday afternoon in December, and I found out when Isabel called me from Fergus while I was up on a roof in Elora. I came down the ladder and stood in a cold parking lot and listened to her voice catch once, just once, before she steadied it. We had a proper celebration at the shop. Dilbra coffee cake from the place on Woolwich. Curtis put the radio on loud. Mark made a speech that was 4 words long and completely accurate. The following spring, we stood in the main hall of the grain elevator, now scaffolded in mid-restoration, with late afternoon light coming through the cleaned west windows and landing on floors that had carried grain for 130 years. Isabel leaned into my side, like that was where she had always stood. We got married the following August. Just us, our people, and the building that started it. Dale stood near the front and looked like he was concentrating very hard on the middle distance. Curtis wore a tie he'd clearly borrowed. March showed up on time, which was, as Dale pointed out quietly to me, the greatest wedding gift he could have given. Isabel walked in wearing a dress the color of old cream, no folder in her hands, nothing to prove to anyone in the room. She looked at me the way she'd looked at the timber frame that November afternoon, like she was checking that the bones were sound and finding out they were. When people ask us how it started, I let her tell it. She always smiles first, that same almost surprised smile from the stairwell. Then she says, "I needed a fiancé by Friday," and I tell them the rest, the roof, the mud, Dale holding his coffee, the folder she pushed away. What I don't always say out loud is what I thought that first morning when she drove up the 4th line at 7:58 with her flat boots on. I thought she had the wrong property. Turns out she had exactly the right one. I think about the morning Isabel drove up my lane at 7:58 a lot more than I expected to. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't really. A silver SUV, a woman in flat boots, a folder full of legal problems, and me covered in caulk dust on a roof. Nothing about that morning looked like the start of anything worth keeping. But that's the thing I keep coming back to. The moments that change your life rarely announce themselves. They just show up on a gravel driveway and ask if you're the one they're looking for. I've thought about why it worked out the way it did, not in a mystical sense, more in the plain practical sense that causes tend to produce effects, and the choices you make when nobody's watching are the ones that build the life you end up with. Isabel came to me because I had turned down a buyout I didn't understand yet. I turned it down because my grandfather built that property, and the number on the offer, however large, didn't account for that. That one decision, made quietly, without an audience, without anyone telling me it was the right call, was the reason Isabel Vance walked onto my job site instead of someone else's. The integrity of that choice, made years before she appeared, was the first stone in a foundation neither of us had planned. And Marcus lost because he didn't understand that. He understood money and leverage and the language of acquisition. What he couldn't account for was a woman who knew what her grandfather's green elevator smelled like in the morning, or a man who thought that mattered. The things he was selling had already told him everything he needed to know about himself, and he hadn't listened. What I learned from all of it is something I'm still figuring out how to say clearly. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from credentials or strategy. It comes from paying attention to what things are actually worth, not what they're listed for. Isabel had it. She walked into my shop and looked at the work seriously, not politely. She asked Dale how he took his coffee and remembered the answer. She stood in the grain elevator and didn't see an asset. She saw her grandfather walking her through it on a summer morning, slow for once. That kind of attention is its own form of wisdom, and it's rarer than any amount of money Marcus had access to. What carried us through the hard part, the board challenges, the headlines, the months of uncertainty, wasn't cleverness. It was something more like stubbornness of the decent kind. The willingness to stay in the room, do the next thing, fix the window that's been drafty since Tuesday, make coffee for the crew even when the week is falling apart. That kind of endurance doesn't get talked about much because it doesn't look impressive from the outside, but it compounds. It builds something real while the people looking for shortcuts are still looking. I don't know that I'd call what happened between Isabel and me a love story, exactly. Or not only that, it was also two people who both happened to believe that old things are worth saving and who were stubborn enough to prove it. That turned out to be enough of a foundation for everything else. The green elevator is still standing, so are we.